Welcome to the City. I'm Anthony Wilson, the Public Information Officer for the City of San Angelo. And today we're going to devote the entire episode to homelessness here in San Angelo. Of course, there's been a lot of attention focused on Tent City along the Concho River underneath the Houston Hart Expressway overpass. And so the city has a game plan for how we're going to address that. One of those involves social services. Another aspect of that involves some legal measures. And so joining us for the first half of our show today is our city attorney, Teresa James. Teresa, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me here.
So let's start off with a question that most people are asking is, why hasn't the SAPD or some other law enforcement agency forced the campers underneath that bridge to move?
Well, there's actually two reasons. The first reason is we don't have an ordinance locally that we can enforce that would require them to move. The second reason is typically in those situations we would have somebody ask the people not to return, and then we could arrest them for trespassing. In this case, because that's state property, the state just has a policy that they are not going to be essentially the victim in a trespass case. So it leaves us without options to do anything.
So what are the concerns that are most associated with those tents staying there?
Well, I think the concerns relate to the number of people that stay down there. There's 25 to 30 people who stay down there, and there's no running water, there's no bathroom facilities, and so of course health and safety are two of the issues that come up. Human waste is a big issue in situations like that, as well as just garbage and trash and those sorts of things laying around. Because that is located at our river, we also have concerns about the water quality in that river. There's standards that we're trying to meet with the river, and it's just not a healthy environment for the river as well.
And there have been a lot of concerns raised by parents of Central High School students who traverse from Central High School to the McDonald's and go right by that Tent City. There's been no incidents, but there still is a concern by parents about the safety.
There is. I have a child who's at Central High School, and I share that concern. You know, but that goes both ways. I think both groups of people are vulnerable. That's a very vulnerable population that stays down there, and so they are at risk of people coming in and harming them as much as them engaging in behaviors that are harmful to others.
So what do city ordinances currently say about camping in public spaces?
We don't have any ordinance that prohibits camping generally in public spaces. The ordinance we do have addresses parks. So you're not allowed to camp in a park unless it's in a designated camping area.
And so that was, just for clarity's sake, that would be Spring Creek Park and Middle Concho Park along Lake Nasworthy.
That's correct.
So what are you going to be proposing to the City Council in regards to an ordinance concerning camping in public spaces?
The ordinance that we're proposing actually has three components. The first component is going to be a prohibition about camping in public spaces. Now, public spaces are going to be defined as any property owned or controlled by the city, the county, or the state, any governmental entity. So the exception to that is if they give you written permission to be there. So for instance, where that Tent City is located, if they were able to gain permission from TxDOT in writing to be there, we would have to allow them to stay under the ordinance. The second thing the proposed ordinance is going to do is it's going to declare a nuisance for all of that stuff that's left behind when those people move on. So after we have the authority to ask them to leave, if they don't take everything with them, we will be able to go and collect it and dispose of that to clean the property. And the third component, which I think is a very important portion of this ordinance, is that there's going to be an exception for those times when it's determined there's not enough low-cost or emergency housing for these people. So right now we know there are empty beds every single night in the city of San Angelo where they could stay. If there's ever an instance, and there's a mechanism in the ordinance which is going to require us to look at this every year, if there's ever an instance where there's not enough beds, then that provision will not be in effect for that period of time.
But to be clear, the Salvation Army has said they always make accommodations for people if they need some sort of emergency shelter.
That's correct.
And getting back to the first point that you made, so do we have any assurances from TxDOT or the county that they are not going to be giving written permission to people to camp in their public spaces?
You know, I've spoken to one representative from TxDOT, and he indicated the only way that written permission is given is through lease agreements with the state, and so that's not going to happen. It makes it very unlikely. There could be instances where people want to camp just for a very short period of time, like the Boy Scouts, for instance, on property that's not typically designated for camping. And in those instances, I could see that they might grant permission.
So how will the ordinance be enforced? Will it be based on the landowner's complaint, or if the SAPD just sees this occurring, do they have the authority just to right then and there say you can't stay here?
The SAPD could, just on their own authority, go to do that. As you know, most of our ordinances are complaint-based enforcement. However, in this situation, we will be notifying the people who are living in Tent City ahead of time that we're proposing this ordinance, so they have fair knowledge that it's going to go into effect. And the police department can just go out and start enforcing.
And so what would the penalties be for someone who violates the no camping in public spaces ordinance?
Because this is going to be a city ordinance, it's going to have the general penalty of $0 to $500 fine for a violation. So they'll be issued a citation, asked to move, and then their stuff will be removed.
So would they typically just be asked to move, and if they don't do that at that point, then they would be issued a citation? Is that how that would work?
You know, it really depends on the officer. If it's somebody who we know is repeatedly, camping in places they're not supposed to, they might just issue a citation without a warning, but it tends to be that we do issue warnings before we enforce on those sorts of things.
Has there been such an ordinance used in other communities?
There has. This one is kind of modeled loosely after an ordinance that Amarillo has had in place for a while. It's been modified to comply with recent, cases that have gone through federal courts, but it's very similar to theirs. There's also an ordinance that was recently enacted in Houston, and there's a number of other cities across the state and country who have very similar ordinances.
Have there been ordinances in other communities that haven't passed court muster, so you have some guidelines as to what you can and cannot propose?
Yes, and that's some of the tweaks that I made to the Amarillo ordinance. When these ordinances first started coming forward from cities, and this is a nationwide issue, this is not just a San Angelo issue, these no camping ordinances have started coming forward. There are groups who advocate for the homeless, saying it's cruel and unusual punishment under the 8th Amendment of the Constitution to make them leave if there's no place for them to go, which is why we've added that provision, which I think, again, is a very good provision, that if there is truly no place for them to go, then we're not going to enforce that ordinance.
So what's the timetable for enacting this ordinance and seeking passage from the City Council?
We have it on the agenda for the May 2nd council meeting, so if it's passed first reading at that meeting, it'll go to second meeting on May 16th, and that will go into effect.
So it would go into effect May 16th?
It will go into effect after it's published, so it's usually the following Monday. In this case, however, because it involves people's lives and they're going to have to figure out some place to go, we believe that we're going to ask council to not enact it until June 1st.
Now, in addition to the camping ordinance, you're also working on an ordinance regarding panhandling. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, I'm actually looking at the entire solicitation ordinance. The panhandling ordinance we have right now is old. There's probably portions in that are unconstitutional because First Amendment speech issues are all tied up in the issue of panhandling. And it's a very fast-moving, often changing component of constitutional law. So what we're going to be looking at is how do we address those First Amendment issues and address the community concerns as well. One thing that I've done in the past, and that's been upheld in courts, is to look at the safety issues that are involved. So what we're going to do is we're going to study the different intersections in the city of San Angelo. And those that are most dangerous, we're going to prohibit any kind of solicitation activity at those intersections. Now, that's not just going to be the panhandling. That's also going to be the 12-year-olds who sell donuts. That's going to be the firemen who, are out there passing the boot for their charity fundraiser. But it's all going to be focused on safety issues, which is a constitutionally permissible reason to pass those ordinances.
But most of that panhandling, I would assume, occur in those high traffic intersections.
That's true. I mean, they go there for a reason, and that's because there are a lot of people, a lot of car volume that goes through those intersections. And
so the reason that we can't just ban panhandling outright is because there are First Amendment free speech issues involved in doing so.
That's right. The U.S. Supreme Court on numerous occasions has declared that kind of behavior, asking people for money, is essentially asking them to support a cause, which is a First Amendment free speech issue. And you have to have a reason other than you don't like what they're saying or what they're doing to prohibit that activity.
At one time, the city of San Angelo required those sort of roadside solicitations to have a permit that was issued by the San Angelo Police Department. Why are we no longer doing that?
Well, that again is one of those constitutional violations that has happened through the development of case law. when we look at speech, we have to look at it in different categories, and the courts look at it in different categories. There's commercial speech. That means you are trying to sell me something, or you're trying to take an order to sell me something. That's a separate category from me providing an idea or sharing an idea or asking you to support my idea. If it were purely commercial speech, then permits would be fine, and we're going to continue to ask for permits for people who are going door to door selling things, or if you're selling them in parking lots, you need to come to us to make sure the business practices are okay. But on those pure speech issues where it's just an ideological discussion you're having or trying to have with the community, the courts really frown on any kind of impediment to that being allowed within public spaces, and that includes permitting.
So, and that sounds like it's maybe then a fuzzy issue that we don't want to run afoul of the courts when it comes to panhandling.
We do not.
All right. What's the timetable for passage and enactment of that particular ordinance?
You know, that ordinance, because the case law changes so quickly, we are doing a lot of research into what the current state of the law regarding panhandling is. So we don't anticipate bringing that ordinance to council until after the new council is seated, probably not until late June or July.
And how confident are you that these legal measures are going to be able to address the concerns that citizens have both about the tent cities and about the panhandling?
Well, I'll tell you this about the legal measures is there has been for a number of months in the city of San Angelo a concerted effort amongst a large group of people who all have concerns about this homeless population. And this is not the only measure we're taking. We are also looking at, involving assessments for mental health, assessments for drugs and alcohol, and all those things you're going to talk about later on that side of things. And because this is just a component of a different or in a larger program, I feel confident that we'll be able to use this as a very effective tool to help resolve some of these issues.
And of course, you serve on the board of the Salvation Army, and you've done that in the past in other communities, so you know what a complex issue this is. It's not as if we're going to be able to eradicate homelessness here in San Angelo.
It's not, and you certainly can't criminalize it. And I think one of the biggest things that we need to do is really continue to educate the public on the fact that directly giving things to people who are helpless or appear to be helpless isn't necessarily the best way to help them. To work through the services we have here is the most effective way to provide them help.
We've been talking with Teresa James. She is the city attorney for the city of San Angelo. And as she mentioned just a moment ago, we're going to talk about some of the social services that we're looking to provide some of the homeless people in our community. And we'll be back right after this.
This calling, it doesn't require brawn. It doesn't call for bluster. Doing this requires but two things: heart and desire. The heart to help children, the elderly, the most vulnerable among us. The desire to work, to commit oneself to a calling, and to your brothers and sisters. I make only these two promises to my officers. I'll be right there alongside you, and I'll help pull the very best out of you. I'm Sergeant Kelly LaJoy. I do this for my officers. I do this for you.
The whole state now knows what San Angelo has for years. The Concho Riverwalk is one of the great places in Texas. The American Planning Association has officially designated the Riverwalk as one of its inaugural 6 Great Places in Texas. The program spotlights locales that exemplify exceptional character and highlight how great planning helps create communities of lasting value.
This place captures all there is in San Angelo. It captures the spirit of the people, it captures the beauty of the river, it captures the landscape and the environment here, and it's just a fun place to come to.
The selection committee said it was impressed with the investment San Angelo has made to develop a space that promotes social interaction and a sense of community. Voters approved spending more than $15 million in half-cent sales tax revenue to beautify and enhance the Riverwalk. Today, this 4-mile stretch boasts a wide range of amenities. They include paddle boating, kayak launches, putt-putt golf, public art, workout equipment, and extensive parks and trails. The Riverwalk also hosts Riverfest each September.
You know, some of our predecessors had the vision to develop a trail along the river, which I had nothing to do with. But when they did that, you know, you saw activity start happening there, and that was a great vision. So our goal was to try and take that to even a grander scale.
The Great Places in Texas program applies unique characteristics found in streets, neighborhoods, and public spaces. Among the 5 other 2017 Great Places in Texas designees are Fredericksburg's Main Street and downtown McKinney. The city of San Angelo is not yet done with improving its Riverwalk. Although there is no timetable, the city's capital improvement plan calls for continued upgrades from Rio Concho Drive to Bell Street and from 14th to 19th Street. The plan also includes extending the trail from Bell Street to Glenmore Park.
And I think there's going to be many to come. It's not going to stop with this, so that while it's a great place, it's going to get even greater before we're said and done.
For SATV, I'm Anthony Wilson. Welcome back. We are continuing our conversation about issues revolving around homelessness here in San Angelo. And joining us now is our Director of Neighborhood and Family Services, Bob Solis. Bob, thanks for being with us.
Oh, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Now, along with considering some legal measures regarding tent cities, the city is also spearheading an effort to connect those tent dwellers with some of our social service agencies here in San Angelo. This is an idea that sprung from the Homeless Coalition. So I want you to begin by just talking about who the Homeless Coalition is, what it is, and what it's working toward.
Certainly. The Homeless Coalition is a local organization made up of agencies, individuals, organizations that deal with homelessness. We take our direction from the Texas Homeless Network, Continuum of Care. They are the state agency that oversees a lot of the state homeless issues and funding as well.
And so what are some of the agencies that are involved in this coalition?
It's a myriad of them. It's basically he's about all organizations that deal with homelessness. It includes the MHMR that deals with mental health. We have ADAC, which deals with substance abuse. We have Legal Aid. We have Salvation Army, Christians in Action. The cities involved, housing, Public Housing Authority, Galilee CDC. Just basically, we have dozens of organizations that are part of this coalition.
And so how did this idea come to fruition about connecting these social service agencies directly with those dwellers in those tents along the Concho River underneath the Houston Hart Expressway overpass?
Well, actually, it's, during one of our meetings, we were discussing the fact that some of these tent city dwellers either don't want to or can't get to some of the resources that we have available to them. So someone mentioned perhaps we should go down there and provide that to them, and that sprung the idea. And we've been kind of fleshing that out a little bit.
And so how will this work? What all will be involved?
Well, we're going to start probably next week. We're going to get a small group of representatives from some of the key agencies that provide these key services. It includes MHMR to go kind of do an initial screening to see if there's any mental health issues that they can help with. ADAC will do some screening to see if there's anyone that has some alcohol or drug abuse issues that they can deal with. We'll have workforce solutions for jobs. We'll have housing representatives to see if there's ways that we can perhaps help them with some kind of housing accommodations.
And in order to provide them some sort of initiative, it's going to be made clear to them that the city is working towards an ordinance that will no longer allow camping on public lands.
That's correct, and they need to take advantage of this opportunity that we're going to provide them.
So what sort of social and medical ills are the homeless most likely to suffer from?
You know, homelessness, there's really two types of homelessness. One is what they call situational homeless. Those are folks who have some kind of life crisis. They lost their job. A lot of women are escaping domestic violence homes and taking their children with them, so they become homeless because the breadwinner happens to be the abuser. So we have those kind of situations that drive them to be homeless. And a lot of times those are short term, less than a year or so. And those folks we can help relatively easy. The other category is considered chronic homeless. Those are folks who have been homeless for over a year, some 10 years, 5 years. I mean, long-term situations. A lot of those folks do suffer from those mental health issues, schizophrenia, those kind of things, but not enough to where they need to be institutionalized. And a lot of them have, about 30% of the homeless have some kind of drug or alcohol abuse, alcohol, and they're addicted to it. So they can't break loose. So those are the two categories. And we have resources to handle both of those type of homeless.
Well, you mentioned those resources, so I'm assuming San Angelo has no shortage of social agencies that can help those folks with those particular issues.
They don't. Like I said, MHMR is very, and they deal with a lot of folks who have mental issues on a daily basis. They have housing available. They have treatment available. Same with ADAC. ADAC has facilities available for detoxing and those kind of things. So,
I've heard you talk about case management and individualized case management. How critical is that in order to successfully reintegrate someone back into society and help them regain their self-sufficiency?
Well, I can tell you that individual case management helps identify the individual needs and requirements for the individual, and they're all different. Some folks just need a job. Some folks need, a little bit of mental health counseling, or drug abuse, or drug counseling, those kind of things. So once you identify that, you can kind of tailor their case management for that individual.
What if you encounter a homeless person who simply says, I don't want the help? What's the approach at that point?
You encourage them. You encourage them to continue reaching out to those who have the resources available to them. And that's all you really can do. If someone really truly doesn't want to be helped, it's almost impossible. Now, some cities have introduced what they call housing first concept, where you take someone that's homeless, put them in a house first, get them there, and then do case management after the fact, long-term case management. We're talking about 2-3 years, long-term, for them to really get integrated. And that's very expensive, and we're not sure if it's working yet. So it's kind of a wait and see.
When you say really expensive, and I know obviously we're much smaller than San Antonio, but I've heard you talk about this happening in San Antonio. What sort of expense is the city of San Antonio incurring with
Millions
this?
and millions. They facility, a $15 million facility. There's no revenue coming in. It's all expenditures. So you have to have a constant revenue coming in. And that's a tough thing for a city to handle.
And so has there been any success from this yet in reintegrating people back into
I think
society?
it's spotty. I mean, right now, I know there are some, and we've done here locally. Don't get me wrong. San Angelo's we're pretty effective in some of the things we have. Small groups fall through the cracks, and that's unfortunate, but it's a reality. We help families. We have a pilot program called the Rapid Rehousing Program, working with the city and Public Housing Authority. And we've integrated 10 families that were homeless. They were staying at the shelter, at the Salvation Army shelter, which happens to be the only one in San Angelo. And then we ended up finding them housing, and hopefully it'll be permanent.
You know, there's been a lot of attention focused on Tent City, which there's approximately 20 people or so living down there in that. And you mentioned the Salvation Army emergency shelter. They had like 10,000 people flow through that last year. Why is it that those folks beneath that bridge aren't more willing to take advantage of the services offered by the Salvation Army?
Well, my understanding, I really don't know firsthand, but I've heard stories and talked with some folks. It turns out that a lot of folks, well, Salvation Army doesn't allow you to continue if you're an alcoholic, they don't let you drink there, for example. If you're doing drugs, you can't do your drugs there. You can't be a nuisance to other folks. There's some rules, and that kind of drives off some people. They'd rather be free to do what they want to do. And I understand that. It's called shelter resistance. They feel better out in the open. I mean, that's their life choices sometimes.
You know, it has even been discussed about the possibility of finding a place where a tent city could locate. What are the problems that might be associated with just simply relocating Tent City?
Well, you're just kind of moving the problem. You really aren't fixing the problem. You're just moving from point A to point B. You're still going to have the same problems. And if the city does it, for example, you start putting the city at risk, because then you've taken ownership of the process, and you could be at risk for a variety of things, because then you have to provide them decent accommodations. So that's the problem you get into.
San Angelo has a really big heart. We want to help people. If people feel moved to help the homeless, what's the best options for them to do so?
Well, first thing we say is please do not give money. Please don't take food down to the tent city, for example, because you're not really helping. I know you feel like you're helping, but you really aren't. We recommend that you take your resources, you take your passion and money, and give it to some of these organizations that do help. And the Salvation Army is one of them, but there's others too. Soup kitchens. There's Rush Street Ministries that provides clothing for homeless folks. There's a variety of options for you, but certainly not giving them money is not the answer.
Well, talk about that. What's the unintended outcome of simply giving them money, food, and clothing to the homeless?
Well, you're basically allowing them to stay in their situation is what you're doing. You're encouraging them to stay in their situation. If they're panhandling, getting money for alcohol, that's what they're going to continue doing. If they're living down the tent city without a care, without worrying about work or all that, you're not encouraging them to go out and find work and find other accommodations. So you're kind of exacerbating the problem.
So to be clear, you're encouraging people to give their time, their talent, their treasures to social agencies such as the Salvation Army that are trained to help people versus trying to take that on your own.
Absolutely.
We've been talking with Bob Salas. He is the Director of Neighborhood and Family Services, and we hope you'll join us for the next episode of The City.